We come now to one of the really great spiritual disciplines, simplicity, simplicitate. The great freeing life, the inward reality of focus upon the kingdom of God that brings us into a lifestyle that is free from what we in Penn called cumber. In my book, Freedom of Simplicity, I write, within all of us, there is a whole conglomerate of selves. There is the timid self, the courageous self, the business self, the parental self, the religious self, the literary self, the energetic self. And all these selves are rugged individualists. No bargaining or compromise for them. Each one screams to protect his or her vested interests. If a decision is made to spend a relaxed evening listening to music, the business self and the civic self rise up in protest at the loss of precious time. The energetic self paces back and forth, impatient and frustrated, and the religious self reminds us of all the lost opportunities for study or evangelistic endeavor. If the decision is to accept an appointment on the Human Services Board, the civic self smiles with satisfaction, but all the excluded selves filibuster. No wonder we feel distracted and torn. No wonder we overcommit our schedules and live lives of frantic faithfulness. But when we experience life at the center, all is changed. Our many selves come under the unifying control of the divine arbitrator. No longer are we forced to live by an inner majority rule, which always leaves a disgruntled minority. The divine yes or no settles all minority reports. Everything becomes oriented to this new center of reference. The quiet evening can be enjoyed to the fullest because our many selves have been stilled by the holy within. The business self, the religious self, the energetic self, all are at peace because they know that we are living in obedience. There is no need to wave the flag of self-interest, since all things good and needful will be given their proper attention at the appropriate time. We enter into a refreshing balance and equilibrium of life. And you know, that is the great reality of simplicity, that balance and equilibrium in life. You know, Glandion, Margaret, we all struggle in a hectic pace and hectic world, and how to move into that kind of balance, how to have that divine arbitrator is tough. Have you experienced that in your lives?
I think I've experienced it from the standpoint that I've complicated my life and have made it sometimes a battle.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think of life as something that requires a great deal of tenacity and energy and focus. And sometimes I miss it. And I come to the realization that something simple like a hot cup of chocolate in the evening with my children, or a walk on the beach, or patting my dog can be a real wonderful way to enjoy the grace of God.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it's recovering the grace of time, the grace of giftedness from God, the grace of relationships, and being committed to that grace.
Yeah. That's what Sheldon Van Auken calls the timeful life. It's a great good, isn't it?
Wonderful.
Margaret, you had mentioned Thomas Kelly as one of your favorite authors. He wrote a lot about this kind of living, didn't he?
Yes, he did. You have to make consciously chosen actions, to choose to slow down, to choose not to hurry, to choose this kind of life. And it comes from the inward reality.
Right. And trust, you see, is at the heart of that inward reality of simplicity. if what I have I can receive as a gift, and if what I have I know is not mine to hold on to, and if what I have can be available to others when it's clearly right and good, then I'm living in that inward life of simplicity. But if what I have I think I've gotten, and if what I have I think is mine to hold on to, and if what I have cannot be available to others when it's clearly right and good, then I'm living in duplicity. This idea of trust really came home to me with our children when they were very young. Our boys loved to eat pancakes, and every now and then on a Saturday morning I'd get up early and fix them a batch of pancakes. And it was always interesting to watch them wolf down pancakes. I mean, it was like there was an endless supply. I never saw them once stuffing pancakes into their pockets saying, well, I'm not sure about Dad. I don't know if there'll be any pancakes tomorrow, you see. They weren't worried about the price of eggs or milk or anything. They lived in trust. Now, it may well be a misplaced trust, but that's how they lived. I had an experience when I was living in the Pacific Northwest that reminded me so much of this trust-filled living. There was a lady in the southern part of the state that would come up to the northern part because she wanted to learn a little bit about listening prayer. But she was a social worker, and she would invite me to come down to her city to do a teaching on healing prayer. Now, she did not mean physical healing. That actually would have frightened her. She meant emotional healing. And I would say, oh, Helen, there's plenty of people in your city that, can do this. You don't need me. And but, she was like the woman before the unjust judge, She just kept at it. And so finally I said to her, Helen, look, let's take the idea of my coming to your city as a little project in prayer itself. You go home, don't share anything with anybody. Let's just pray about it. And if in 3 or 4 days or a week or so, 3 or 4 people ask for this kind of experience, we'll know that God is in it and I'll come. She said, okay. 3 days later, she calls me. 12 people have asked for this experience. I said, okay. Down we came. They were all social workers, about 15, I think, finally gathered in a home. So it was an extended connections that she had. And that first evening, there was a very distinguished middle-aged gentleman. And he said to the group, be easy on me because I'm not one of you. That was his way of saying that he didn't consider himself a believer. But God was so tender on us for that weekend that by Sunday afternoon, this man turned to the group and he said, could you pray for me that I might know Jesus the way you know Jesus? And I knew it was a tender moment, but all the normal responses didn't feel appropriate to me. Thankfully, by that time, when I didn't know what to do, I just shut up. And one dear fella in that group came up beside this man, and he prayed for this man. Oh, it was a tender prayer. I felt like taking off my shoes. I thought, this is holy ground. But what he prayed was a television commercial. It was some time ago, I think it was Nestea, Take the Nestea Plunge, pictures of people falling back into a swimming pool, sweltering, And this man prayed that this man would fall back into the arms of Jesus the way those people would fall into the swimming pool. And all of a sudden I thought, what an image of trust. And this man, there was this deep, and he begins to weep, and saving faith comes. And he tells us later that this connected very deeply in his mind to his baptism as a little child. Isn't that amazing? See, this life of trust. So that's the inward reality of simplicity, but it results in an outward lifestyle. We can't just stay with the inward reality. Now, it's not easy for us to think about the outward lifestyle because it's a very dangerous thing. It can turn into legalisms easy. I'm part of a denominational heritage that did that a great deal. In the book Celebration of Discipline, I try to give 10 controlling principles for the function of simplicity in our life. One of them was to buy things for their usefulness rather than their status. You understand? Our cars, our homes, our clothes. Usefulness, not status. Another was to reject anything that's producing an addiction in you. I remember I was teaching in Southern California, and we were working on that principle of dealing with things that are an addiction to us. And the next night, a student came and he said, you know, we were talking about that the night before, and the next morning I got up and went out to get my copy of the Los Angeles Times, and it wasn't there. And he said, I began to panic. And then he said, I spied my neighbor's newspaper across the street. And I began to plot how I might go over, you know, and steal it. And then he realized, I'm addicted. So he goes back in the house, calls the newspaper office, and says he wants to cancel his subscription to the newspaper. And the person on the other line was, you know, taking down information and said, well, you know, was there bad service or something? No, 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 I'm addicted, he said. And then she says, well, would you like to cancel your entire subscription, or would you like to get the weekend, just the weekend papers? No, no, he says, I'm going cold turkey. And he shared that with us. But, you know, that's an interesting struggle, isn't it? Those kinds of things.
I think we live in a world where it's so hard to live an addiction-free life because even our spirituality can be addictive to us if we don't understand how to handle it and simplify it. Yeah. And I think your focus on simplicity helps you to recognize that you can't even create an addiction around spirituality. At least you become a slave to it. Right. So you have to always remember the simplicity of God's grace, the simplicity of God's love, in order to maintain what's balanced for you, for your life.
Well, it's really about the relationship with the divine other, the eternal one. And when we're focused heavenward, then we can have that balance in our life.
I love the comment that Soren Kierkegaard had about seeking first the kingdom of God and the importance of that. And he says, well, what do we do in this? He writes, should a person get a suitable job in order to exert a virtuous influence? He says, no, we seek first the kingdom of God. Well, then should we give our money away to the poor? No. First, we seek the kingdom of God. Well, then perhaps we should go out and preach this truth to everybody, that people should seek first the kingdom of God. No, he says, we seek first the kingdom of God. And then he writes this, then in a certain sense, it is nothing I shall do. Yes, certainly, in a certain sense, it is nothing. Become nothing before God. Learn to keep silent. In this silence is the beginning, which is first to seek God's kingdom. Another principle that I mention in the book is developing a habit of giving things away. I remember one of the first times I just wanted to have that experience for myself. And I had one of those fancy bicycles, and I really wanted the old standard, you know, thing that you get in a garage sale. And so I just prayerfully listened. And there was a man in our fellowship, his family came to the church, but he didn't. But somehow I got word that he wished that he could get a bicycle for his son. I think it was for Christmas. And I went to him and I said, "Oh, I have just the thing for you." So I remember we fixed that all up and made our way there. And I remember driving to his house, singing that little chorus, "Freely, freely you have received, freely, freely give." It had a whole new meaning to me. And then, you know, we presented it to the Father and the Son, and, you know, it was a great thing for them. And then the Father followed me back out to the car, and he just, you know, "Why are you doing this?" he said, you know. And it was a wonderful opportunity just to say, well, I'm learning. I'm learning how to let go. And the importance of just letting go. Letting go, yeah. How have you found that, Glandion?
I found that the giving of time to a person who is seeking life and formation is the way that I experience simplicity of giving and being not bound by that reality.
Yeah.
I think time is something that is precious to us all today, and the opportunity to give it away without expecting anything in return is a wonderful grace. Just being present with people, loving people, is what I believe to be a great gift of giving.
Yeah. There's a wonderful old Shaker song, "'Tis a gift to be simple, simple gifts." And I've asked George if he would play it for us. We could sing it together. I've been to several of the old Shaker meeting houses, and you know, they had wooden floors and movable pews, and they shoved them to the sides and would gather around in large circles. And I've been there actually when they've recreated some of those experiences. And just the joy of that. 'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in a place that's right, 'twill be a valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn, turn will be our delight, till by turning, turning, we come round right. George, could you lead us in that song?
Would you join us? 'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free. 'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free. 'Tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn, turn will be our delight, till by turning, turning we come round right. Once again. 'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free. 'Tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, we'll be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn, turn will be our delight, till by turning, turning we come round right.
Now that's why the discipline of simplicity, for example,
Yes.
is a great, actually, frugality is the discipline, simplicity is the result, in a sense, of the life.
Well, but the way simplicity has been understood,
Right.
it really is frugality.
It
you
is.
know.
It is.
And it leads to a life where you get rid of the clutter. And you are able to have a unified purpose. And that means, among other things, you can throw stuff away.
Yeah. I remember, I think it was William Penn used this wonderful phrase about letting go of cumber.
Yes, yes. And just, I mean, think of a society where we have all these rental places where you put your junk.
Yeah, right, right. I got to rent another storage.
Yeah, you've already got your garage full. And what that says about the person, though, is that means that they are inwardly in bondage.
Yep, exactly. Because simplicity is an inward reality. That is, when that change comes about, the inward reality that results in an outward lifestyle free of cumber.
You know, I guess the thing that you practice in simplicity most is letting things go. It's actually trusting God.
Yeah. And that's where the question, how has the practice of these disciplines actually changed our lives? You and I, for example.
Yes.
It becomes real because it enables us to function well and to love God and love our neighbor.
Absolutely
I mean, that's
right.
where we grow.
Absolutely right. I more or less backed my way into the practice of disciplines before I even knew the name. I was very concerned to preach in such a way that people would be converted. And I knew that prayer was crucial to that. But as many ministers will tell you, praying adequately is not easily in reach. And I didn't know anything about it, but I knew that I should try it, and I just happened upon some empty rooms in the college where Jane and I were at the time, on the 4th floor of the Sunday school building of the church that was associated. And it had these little chairs that are that tall, you know.
Yeah, right.
And no one could sit down in them. And so those rooms were empty all week. And I found that I could go in there. And just by, I backed my way into, I went in to pray. But by staying, I was in solitude.
Yep.
And in silence.
Yep.
And I began to experience the effects of that, though I didn't know what it was.
Yep.
And then I learned that if you're going to pray, you have to be in a place to do that in your heart.
It's so interesting because at a college I was teaching at, they had this chapel building that was condemned. I mean, they needed to do renovations before it could be used. And so it really became for me a kind of private chapel.
Yes.
And I used it to walk around. It was about an 800-seat probably chapel. And just pacing around. Nobody would ever come in there.
Yes.
So that was one of the places where not having the money to renovate the place helped me a great deal.
Helped a great deal. I was just talking to a college chaplain in the Midwest a few weeks ago, and he was telling about how he had just come to the end of himself and found himself sitting on the front row of the empty chapel for hours. And how that had put him in touch with God.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that we don't have enough teaching. We have to more or less be driven to that before we find out. Now, of course, we've got some teaching now that things have changed in recent years, and that's a really good thing. I think the local churches have to come to grips with this, and especially they need to understand that what we would call church as usual is not adequate for spiritual growth. And we need to begin as pastors and leaders in the churches to not only, of course we have to practice these things,
but began to know our people well enough to lead them into the practices of them, to shepherd and teach them through the process. Because one of the things that we were talking about earlier, the pitfalls, one of the main pitfalls is that people try once, it doesn't work, and they give up.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's where they need a teacher or a pastor or a friend to just step in and say, no, no, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You have to learn how to do it.
Right.
And you go through this and you go through that, and then they can begin to really tie into it.
You know, I mean, if some of these great tennis players had quit after the first game that they played.
Yes, it's amazing. I think here, too, grace has misled us because the idea that it's grace means somehow you don't have to practice.
Right.
But you have to practice.
Yeah.
Period. You have to practice prayer. You have to practice solitude. You have to practice loving your neighbors yourself, and then fixing why you couldn't do it.
I remember the man coming out of the subway in New York and asking the police officer how to get to Carnegie Hall. And his answer was, practice, young man, practice.